Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. So Louis, thank you so much for taking the time to be my guest here on the Anti-Architect Podcast.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I'm a huge fan of Gary Handel himself. I've always loved his work. I love sort of his split off from KPF and kind of going out on his own. And, you know, a lot of people have done that, but he's really made a mark. And we'll talk about if he's a Black Cape architect or not, but he's probably pretty close. And the work from like the work with the High Line, the September 11th Memorial, obviously. There's a project that you guys did near where I live in Asbury Park called the Asbury Ocean Club. I don't know if you know that building, but
absolutely.
It's really transformed the area. I don't know if the people that live around that area appreciate it as much as they should, but they should. And then on a personal note, I've not spoken to him in a while, but Tony D'Onofrio, who works at the firm, was an early mentor of mine.
Okay.
And yeah, at a firm called Swanky Hayden Connell, kind of taught me everything on the technical side. And then I abandoned the technical side for the design side. But hopefully Tony will listen, and maybe I can get him on the podcast too. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's always a good conversation with Tony.
Yeah, he's very good about sort of the getting into the details, telling the story, and all that stuff. So, so I have not had many sustainability, guests or people with that level of expertise that you have on this podcast, which I'm surprised, kind of going back through all the episodes. And especially with your work around Passive House, and I've been doing some research on that, and I realize I don't know anything about it, which is kind of cool, so we can have an honest conversation where I get to learn about it. But before we get into that, I would love to kind of take a step back and talk about sustainability more broadly. So what are the main challenges architects face in implementing real, meaningful, sustainable design?
Yeah, I think there's, it's a big question, and where it takes me immediately is actually kind of the trajectory of sustainable design over the last however many 15, 20 years. I think sustainability has been associated with a premium, an add-on. This is something that happens in addition to design. Whereas I think what we're seeing, in the last 5-10 years is that really it is core to design, and that good design is sustainable design. It's not good design that is also sustainable. So I think trying to overcome this impression that it is something that we need to spend an extra buck for marketing purposes, or but that it is actually something that is going to make the project work better for the people that are using or around the building, both the occupants and the community at large.
Yeah. I still feel like, probably not so much with your clients, but a lot with our clients, especially on the very corporate clients, there is always that pushback is that, it's extra, right? And what I try to tell them is, well, at least let's say we're doing corporate interiors or a restaurant or something like that. The materials themselves, right? There isn't an upcharge for that anymore. Those are baked into essentially everything that we do from a design point of view. But then how do we get past this, it's extra, it's going to cost me so much more kind of thing?
I think, tying that into not just, using this word sustainability is, I almost want to just not use it, right? You almost want to just say, you want to talk about how much better the building or the space will operate, right? I mean, a sustainable space, one that is thought through from day one as a space that's going to be in existence for, 10, 20, 60 years, you're going to think about how to make sure that those systems are operating right, that those materials are lasting a long time, that they're durable, that they're easy to maintain. And all that stuff makes it more sustainable, but it also makes it more affordable and easier to operate for the owner moving forward. So I think there is kind of an economic bottom line that, when we start to think about, buildings not just as a snapshot of time, okay, it's done, here's your building, but as a living thing that continues into the future, it becomes a lot easier to, frame that in a language that I think owners are much more open to listening to.
Yeah, even things like orientation, right? Just kind of setting the building correctly, right? I mean, that can have a huge impact.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't cost any extra money.
Yeah, totally.
That's just sort of good design right off the start. I remember in architecture school, we used to start like that. Like, oh, look at the sun, look at the way it's facing, where are the prevailing winds, things like that, where I feel like now you're just, a developer will come and say, this is the plot of land, this is the direction I need it, this is where I want, this is what's going to yield me the most money. And you're right, I think if people looked at it as a thing that's going to be there theoretically forever, what is the life cycle of that? Do you guys get into that? Do you get into what the life cycle of costs are if the air conditioning is X amount more affordable or more efficient, things like that?
Yeah, we absolutely try to. I mean, we, Handel Architects, we have a wide range of projects, a wide range of client types. Some are more amenable to some of these things than others. And so, wherever possible, we like to, first and foremost, get the team assembled as early as possible. You want all the consultants on board, because this is not, we are not setting the sustainable goals for the project as the architect. We are, moderating the conversation around sustainable goals with a group of experts that include the client, that include, their operations staff, that include especially the engineers and the consultants that are on the project. And so, to the best extent possible, we want to get everyone involved, and we want to, to do those life cycle assessments to look at, like on the mechanical side, it's an easy example, let's look at these different systems, but let's not look at first cost. Let's look at, what is this going to cost in 20 years? How frequently are you replacing it? What are the utility costs over time? And now with, these kind of evolving regulatory contexts, we're looking at Local Law 97 and we're saying, okay, if you install this today, 5-10 years from now, you're going to be accumulating a fine for your emissions, and how do you factor that into the overall cost of the system, the decisions you're making day one?
Yeah, that actually was going to be one of my questions. Was how do the regulations kind of in some cities slow you down, and maybe in some cities they're more progressive and they kind of push you forward, right? Do you see more cities adapting these kind of things?
Yeah, we definitely see more cities, beginning to adopt sustainable design priorities, regulations around energy efficiency, emissions targets, things like that. I think, does it slow us down or does it help us? I think if you ask, me and the sustainability folks in the office, they're going to give you a different answer than if you ask some of the other architects, probably. For us, it's critical. It's a critical tool. It helps us, we're talking about electrification 5-6 years ago. Now the city has mandates, the buildings need to be electrified by a certain year. So that makes it so much easier to sit in a room with a client and say, hey, well, let's electrify this thing.
Choice.
We can talk about the benefits, but also like one of the big benefits is you're going to have to do it sooner or later. It's going to be a lot more expensive to replace this equipment down the line because you didn't design it electric day one. So let's think about how we do that day one. So those regulations, I think, absolutely help. And speaking from a New York City context, there's a lot of conversation going back and forth between the regulatory agencies and the architectural community, largely via sustainable design directors and engineers and folks that are in a lot of these different advocacy groups that really help drive thoughtful regulations that can be achieved and will also have a meaningful impact for the broader goal of reducing emissions. And
do you guys get involved with some of the city officials, being sort of you're that's definitely your premier at this, your expertise is that? Do you ever influence sort of public policy or see architects helping to influence that?
Yeah, we a little bit of, rarely directly, but through other organizations, Urban Green. I'm on the board at New York Passive House and co-chair of our policy group there. So we're very active in, trying to shape where the next version of the energy code's going. AIA has the Committee on the Environment, and there's a very active code group here in New York that is doing a lot with shaping policy. And these are all just not only are, I think, they helping be this great conduit for our industry to regulators, but they're also just like a lot of really great people. They're people who are incredibly motivated. They're thoughtful. They're willing to change their minds as new information comes in. They're not this kind of stuck in their, no, this is the right way we need to do it. Everyone is very malleable and kind of doing this great kind of group think to try to help figure out how to push this along.
That's great to hear. I always worry that, and a lot of times we'll have, a grand opening or something like that, and the politicians come in and they're the ones that give all the speeches, and, they kind of take credit for the whole thing. And listen, you need them to pave the way to achieve these things a lot of times. But many times the architect or the engineer is not involved, right? And you always wonder, like, hey, can we get in there and kind of talk a little bit about what it is that we need that can help this process forward and not be a bottleneck? So that's great to hear that there's camaraderie around that, which is awesome. So you mentioned it before, this idea you don't like the word sustainability, and I get it. So what are some of the other things that you can kind of pull out from the sustainability? And again, not Passive House, we'll get into that in a minute, but what are some of the things you can pull out that you see are the initiatives of, I don't know, I'm going to use sustainability.
No, you got to do it. I don't know how to, I also can't escape it. Right now, I'd say the big kind of word that we're all thinking and talking a lot about is circularity, and how to, shift what we all see as pretty clearly a linear material economy into a more circular one. We extract materials, we turn them into products, we use the product, we throw the product away, usually ends up in a landfill. Good outcomes that it gets burned for fuel, which I guess is good, depends, but it's better than nothing, but it still has its issues. But there is this, growing world of the material economy where they, manufacturers are taking responsibility for the products that they're putting out there, and they're taking them back, and they're either putting it, in the best case scenario, right back into the material stream, or at least downcycling it into, carpet backings or whatever it is that kind of, so that it's not going and sitting in a landfill somewhere. So that is a big area that I think we're talking about a lot. And that's an area where we have a lot of agency just through conversation. Mm-hmm. I mean, I try to tell all the architects in our office, whenever you're talking to somebody, ask them if they have, whenever you're talking to a vendor, ask them if they have a take-back program, ask them if they have EPDs, ask them if they have HPDs. The more we ask about these things, the more likely these things are to happen. They run it up the chain and say, hey, every time I go to this office, they're asking me, do we have a take-back program? I'm getting tired of saying no, and maybe eventually we get to the point where these things are starting to... It's
a really great point, and influence it that way. So what's an HPD, and what was the other one you said?
Oh, an EPD. Yeah, so EPD is an Environmental Product Declaration.
Okay.
So largely that is looking at... the impact on so it takes the whole life cycle of the material into account, from extraction through end of life, and it will tell you, how much embodied carbon, ocean acidification, like all these. There's 20 different metrics or something. We're largely looking at it for a metric called global warming potential, which is essentially the amount of embodied carbon emissions in that material.
Okay.
And what we're seeing as we start to get this transparency data is that there are very simple product decisions that we can make where we can look at two LVT floorings or something, which vinyl is a whole other discussion that we can talk about, but it's very common material, hard to get away from. So if we've got to choose that material, at least we could choose a better version. And when we have two EPDs in front of us, we can see, well, the embodied emissions of this one is a quarter of this one, same price. Like, let's looks are very similar. Let's go this one.
Yeah.
It's just one more data point. And then a health product declaration similarly is a transparency document. That one's more about all the chemicals that are inside of the material. So they'll declare down to a certain threshold, 100 parts per million or something. Anything above 100 parts per million in the material will be declared as a chemical that's in the material.
Some sort of harmful chemical. Yeah. So along those lines, I had actually written that down, embodied carbon, right? And it's something that's come up more and more in our projects as well. We always need an outside consultant to help with that. Is that something you guys are doing? Actually, let's back up. Can you explain embodied carbon for the audience? And then do you guys do that in-house, or is that someone you also bring someone in to study that?
Sure. So embodied carbon, we're all very familiar with operational carbon. When we turn on the lights, we're using electricity. That is the product of someone burning something somewhere, or best case scenario, of a solar panel. The opposite or the kind of other side of that is the embodied carbon of the light bulb itself. When that light bulb was made, you had to make the glass, you had to extract the metal for the fitting and all the wiring, and all of that has carbon emissions associated with it. So that kind of gets captured in this number, embodied carbon. And then a lot of times we're thinking cradle to gate, which is basically when it was conceived to when it got to your door to be installed. More and more we're thinking cradle to grave, which is including that end of life that we were talking about a little bit before. So embodied carbon, the interesting thing about embodied carbon is that it is, it's kind of the equivalent to first cost when we think about the economics of a building, because it's something that you're doing right at the beginning. You're doing it one time, and then it's there. Your operational carbons are going to continue, or operational emissions are going to continue to grow. So your building's operational carbon is going to continue on indefinitely, but your embodied carbon all happens at the front end. And so you have a real impact, right there at the beginning to try to drive that down as much as possible. And in the first couple of years of your building, that embodied carbon is going to be, a huge percentage of your overall building's carbon, and it'll slowly kind of become less of a percentage as the building lives longer. But so that's kind of a general overview of embodied carbon.
Okay.
And to your second question, we are just kind of getting into this now. We work with consultants often, especially on projects that are like LEED Platinum, or projects that have specific ESG goals for clients, where they're saying we want to kind of reduce our scope 3 emissions. Embodied carbon falls under scope 3. So in that instance, we'll hire a consultant that will do a life cycle assessment.
Okay.
And we'll determine the total embodied carbon of the project, and there'll be different options for, if you change this about your concrete, you might be able to reduce it by this percentage, or we will kind of try to understand avenues for reducing it.
It's exactly on our project, this particular project I'm thinking of. It has to do with the concrete, right? Different aggregate of concrete,
that is the
and
biggest,
therefore, therefore you can reduce it. And you can reduce it sometimes by 30% or 50% even. With and no one's going to know the difference, right?
Yeah.
And the cost isn't even that ridiculously crazy. So yeah, I think there's a lot you can do on that end. And then the kind of last question on the general sustainability is regenerative architecture. So this is a term I hear now more and more. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot more. I'm seeing a lot of my fellow sustainability directors, becoming regenerative design specialists, or kind of changing the title a little bit to that. And I it's one of those words that I'm sure someone has put a very clear definition out there. I find it a little hard to define, but I think in spirit, the direction that it's taking us makes more sense than sustainability. If you think about sustainability, we are sustaining, the status quo. Regenerative is trying to, bring back a point at which, things were maybe, where we weren't well over our emissions threshold, or our carbon dioxide thresholds. And it's also, I think, kind of it's more active word, where it's saying, the building is, or the space is continually working to improve quality of life or its emissions profile. So I like the kind of directionality that is taking us. And the thing that I think I can see most directly when I think about regenerative architecture, the thing that kind of comes to me most directly is actually less on the side of materiality and energy, and more on the side of community and the way that we are designing spaces that can, are more resilient and help the community be more resilient, to help the neighborhood be more resilient, that, offer services to a community that maybe didn't have enough services leading up to that. So I think this kind of idea of helping to regenerate the urban environment is an interesting aspect of that is connected to, sustainability and energy,
Sure.
So. Yeah.
Very cool. I think that's a great explanation. I love it. There's a lot to that, I think, and that really, to me, is the future of kind of where we're going with a lot of this. Yeah. So if you had to pick one thing, what annoys you about your fellow architects?
What annoys me about my fellow architects? So, this is, I think, if you would ask me this 10 years ago, I would have a very clear answer. I find myself more recently, in recent years, kind of much more inspired by my fellow architects than, and I think that ties to, there's. I think you have to have a certain, a healthy ego, a healthy self-confidence to get into this profession. You're, part of the schooling is standing in front of a room of your, people that are much smarter than you and welcoming their criticism over and over again. So, you have to have a certain amount of ego there. And I think that we've seen that play out different ways with different architects in a different time period throughout the history of the profession. I think there is this kind of idea of the architect as, the conceptual driver of a project, of a space. They have this idea, this napkin sketch, and then it becomes this beautiful thing. And that, I think, is annoying. That I think is that ego taking it a direction that I think is probably not terribly productive. But on the other side of that, I think that same energy can also be channeled into this idea of, not building as idea, but building as conversation. Building as, we are this moderator of this really great collaborative discussion between these people that are the smartest at what they do, and they're all working together to solve this really complex problem. And we are the people in that mix that kind of touch every aspect of it. Not everyone sees every part of it, but we kind of do. We don't, we're not experts everywhere, but we can kind of, know the right person to pull in at the right time. And I think when we are the kind of architects of that process, I think that's really where the results are. It may not be the most beautiful, inspiring cover image for a magazine, but I think that's where you have people moving through the space saying, wow, I love being here. The experience of being in this space, or wow, this really changed the neighborhood. And as you were kind of saying about Asbury, it's that's where I think that we can put that ego to good use.
I love that answer. I hosted my kids' 7th grade class here in the office. They were in the city for seeing a Broadway show, and they came to the office and had lunch. And I did a little, what does it mean to be an architect? Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really sat back and thought of that in a while. So I put together a very simple presentation. But I think the cool part of what I realized as I was telling them is we get exposed to a lot of different things. You can work with a restaurateur one day, and you can work with a corporate office person, a developer. I've met crazy, people along the way here, very high, high status people. Yep. And it's such a great mix. And you kind of, over the years of your career, you pull all that together, and it just makes you appreciate kind of what architecture can actually do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in places like in Asbury, or you think of Bilbao, right? That transformed that entire city, created a whole new, version of that city. Mm-hmm. And there's so many examples of like that. It's fascinating, it really is. So
yeah, I think it's a great profession for a lifelong learner. Like if you and it's wasted on someone who's not willing to change their mind and let their brain kind of be malleable as they move through life, because it is the exposure to all the different people and ideas is just constant. Every day is different, and I think it's a great way to kind of talk about it.
So our profession is notorious for being overworked and underpaid. What do you think about that? And is that something we do to ourselves? Are there things that you've thought of that we can improve upon on that?
Yeah. That's a big thing that. As a young architect, of course, that's something you interact with, and you're like, oh, I don't love this. I don't love this reputation, But it certainly weeds out the people who aren't passionate about the profession, which is interesting. But I think from the lens of integrating sustainability into projects, it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because we are, both in what we are trying to do with our own goals as a firm, and also what we're being driven to do by new regulations and new kind of client-driven goals. It creates a lot more work, and it's work that can be increasingly difficult to quantify in terms of hours and fee. Partially because we're kind of making it up as we go along. Sure. All these processes are really still in development. And much further along than they were a few years ago, but still, working through it. And I don't think it's as clear a part of like architecture school and professional practice education early on in our lives. So thinking about it from that lens, how do we implement the practices that we know will benefit the project without just overworking the team, decimating morale, creating a bunch more hurdles that people feel like they have to jump. So I think, there's an element of that that's just making sure you're focusing on the right things, which is very, very difficult. And then there's...
designers can also go off on a tangent, right? And now cause themselves and the team more work.
Absolutely. And then that, that changes what the right thing might be, because that tangent might have been very valuable. You might have found something really interesting in there, and you're like, oh, well, actually, maybe we should be, so... And then I think technology is going to play a role there as well. And, we're working on that in the office, and I'm sure a lot of architects are. How can we figure out how to incorporate, a lot of this kind of data management technology that we're seeing out there, AI being the kind of word that everyone's using. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's just more like machine learning. But how can we kind of incorporate some of that to streamline things, to make knowledge sharing faster and easier, make sure no one, getting the right information to the right person at the right time. And, so that is definitely part of the process, but still struggling to figure out how to work it into the fee.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we created this lab, and the technology that we created on the AR VR side was to get the clients to help them make decisions. Right. And if we could help them with those decisions and make those very sort of strategic decisions early on, then we can really focus on developing that, whatever that is, right? Get that further developed quicker. And then when we get into construction documents and then ultimately into construction, there's less surprises, there's less changes, things like that. And then you have tendency to not overwork and crush the team with constantly delivering on a deadline that never seems to come, right?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the earlier integrating strategy and priorities as early as possible, and having the people that are going to inform that process involved early, is a tremendous benefit to the project moving forward, and to the amount of time it takes.
Yeah, we tell our clients it's almost like we're going to give you a window into how the sausage is made, right? Let's show you what we're doing, and you become part of that process as well. It's not this magic thing that we show up, as you said, with the sketch, and then somehow it gets built.
Right.
Maybe we'll in the future with AI. So I'd love to talk about Passive House in general, and then kind of talk about some of your projects. So what are the key principles of Passive House design? How do they differ from traditional building methods? And just give us an overview of what it is. Because frankly, I thought I knew what it was, and then having done research on you, I realized I have no idea what I'm talking about. So.
Well, it is it's kind of a misnomer, Passive House. That's something that we've in the community have been struggling to kind of overcome. Because it is not a house, it is it is a building standard.
That I didn't know.
Passive is the key part of it. And in terms of thinking about how it differs, so it's a building standard that is really focused on building science, and taking the basic, the kind of fundamental principles of building science and making sure that we are integrating them into our buildings in a way that drives energy use down really dramatically, especially thermal energy use, so the heating and cooling in the building. And so it shouldn't be that different than the way we've historically built. And actually, if you look back 100 years at, these pre-war buildings, these big, solid masonry structures with not a lot of glass, the principles of, behind some of those, the thermal performance of some of those buildings are not terribly far, excluding airtightness. They're not terribly far from a lot of what we're doing now. But the trick now is to take those principles with the kind of, image of what a building is and what people want out of their spaces now, and kind of merge that into kind of the future building. So the key principles are a really airtight, continuously insulated thermal envelope. That's really where it all starts. And that means eliminating thermal bridging anywhere throughout the building. So anytime you have conductive material, metal, penetrating your facade, you want to figure out how to break that with some kind of insulation, structural plastics, things to try to limit heat loss, because all those things are just constantly pulling heat out of your building. And then airtightness, you'd be amazed how much air just leaks out our buildings. A key part of Passive House to test that airtightness is a blower door test at the end of the project, and the levels of performance that we're able to get out of these blower door tests, just through, they're very similar details to what we're already doing. It's just more QA/QC and making sure that we're thoughtfully detailing every transition. We're not kind of leaving, saying here's the general idea and leaving a lot of the details up to chance.
Sure.
We're really honing in on what we're doing, but the materials are pretty similar, and you're getting these really impressive airtight buildings out of it, and that drives the energy loss of the building down, which then allows you to have smaller mechanical systems, so can help reduce energy demand that way. Kind of got off on a tangent there, but so basically thermal envelope, and then really efficient systems, heating and cooling, and a big aspect of it, because when you have this airtight envelope is ventilation, because you don't want to create these airtight boxes that nobody can breathe in, or become just filled with CO2. So we incorporate mechanical ventilation into all of our Passive House buildings, and that is balanced. So as much supply air that's going in matches the exhaust air that's coming out, and all that is going through heat recovery. So there's a energy recovery ventilator that is capturing all the heat or cooling that's already been created in the building and putting it into the supply air going in. And those operate at like an 80% efficiency. So you can really, right now, a lot of buildings out there are just exhaust only. They're there's your kitchen, your bath is just sucking all that heat you just paid for right out. It's just dumping it out into the, 80% of that could be recaptured and put back into your space. And that's a huge place where energy savings happen.
So it's funny because when I think of Passive House in general, and I know the super insulation and the airtightness, but I always was taught that, buildings had to breathe, right? You're taught that early on, or a house has to breathe. And the more you kind of you understand this, that's not true. It has to breathe in a different way. So I guess is there any sort of, do people not really truly understand it and why it's important, and how do you begin to change that?
I think there's people are beginning to understand it more. There's definitely some kind of myths about it that have made its adoption a little more challenging. One of them is that notion of a building needing to breathe, and the idea that, you're making this airtight envelope, we can't have operable windows, which is not true at all. We want operable windows in all of our Passive House buildings, especially if people are living there. We want them to be able to open the window. I mean, I would never want to live in an apartment where I can't open the window. And actually, it makes it makes opening the windows even more effective, because your envelope is so thermally efficient that, if you live in a south-facing apartment that's just getting, direct sunlight all day, you might open the windows in the morning, but you need to close and kick on the AC at 10 a.m. because that sun's been hitting you and everything's warming up. When you have that much insulation and that much kind of thermal inertia in your wall, you can leave those windows open a little longer because you're not getting that heat radiating into your space and warming up the space as quickly. So the operable windows is a challenge. the biggest challenge, I think, to kind of market rate adoption in passive house is just glazing percentage.
Okay.
You really tough to get a 55% glass building as a passive house. If you do that, it's going, well, I'm not sure if you can do 50-55, but the highest percentage glass buildings are going to have really, really high performing and therefore pretty expensive glazing.
Okay.
So we're doing triple glazed even in our buildings that are 25% glazing, 30% glazing.
Okay.
So it is that glass is a challenge. So I think I'm always, when I'm on my high horse here about passive house, trying to advocate for this changing our thinking a bit about what does it mean to have a great place to live? Does it mean floor to ceiling windows? Because a lot of times your shades are down anyway, right? You have to put furniture in front of it, right? Wouldn't you rather have a space where you can trust that the air in that space is filtered and fresh, 24/7, continuous filter fresh fresh air that's in your space, where you don't overheat every time you sit next to the window because your glass is thermally performing such that it's not radiating heat or cold back at you, so you can enjoy your admittedly smaller window a bit more. So I think kind of reframing the conversation of what does it mean to have a great space would help it. But yeah, those are, I think, the two biggest hurdles to.
So I'd love to get into this a little bit, and we're doing something else slightly different, where we're going to be looking at some images of your work, the Handel work, and yours in particular. So I'd love for you to kind of take us through some of these projects and just explain a little bit about them, what makes them significant. And I think if I can, we'll have to describe them for the audience that's listening, and then for the YouTube folks, it'll be pretty easy to understand. But I think what took me aback by these projects in particular was the scale of them. I mean, these are massive projects in any kind of project, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are 700,000-800,000 square foot projects, mixed use developments, all that sort of stuff, and they're in interesting climates too, where it's not a mild climate at all. Yeah. So, yeah, take us through some of these. This is the first one. This is what is this one?
This is Santander Tower.
Santander Tower, yeah, in Miami.
Yep. And so, just to be clear, this is not a passive house. It is a sustainable project. But yeah, so what we're looking at here on the screen is Santander Tower, which is a design proposal for the new headquarters for Santander Bank in Miami. They had an existing building on the site that is being replaced by this much larger building. They needed a lot more space, and Santander has they came to us. Actually, we kind of first interacted with them with a building in Santiago, and this is our second project with them. But this, they brought to us the desire to build the most sustainable office building in the world. It was kind of the challenge that we were thrown. And from day one, this was an incredibly integrated process. We had these really robust sustainability workshops. We worked with a great consultant, TransSolar, who does their climate engineers, thinking about all these different strategies for how to improve the performance of the building. And so what we're looking on the screen is a rendering of the project. The project has not started construction yet. It is a office tower that has a diagrid structure on the exterior of the building. So something that, Gary Handel and the team at Handel Architects have been playing around with a lot on projects over the last several years is, how you can really free up the interior space by having this exterior structure.
Sure.
Because it creates this rigid shell that you don't need all these interior columns for, which works great for an office building. It doesn't work great thermally in a lot of climates because what you're doing is you're putting all this really robust material on the exterior of the building. It's exposed to the elements. It's all transferring heat through the slabs because it all needs to be structurally tied back. In Miami, though, it actually works pretty well because you don't have heat. Heat loss is not your concern. So it actually we found that the thermal bridging and the impact the thermal bridging was having on the interior environments in the offices was very minimal in this context, particularly if we painted everything white and made these structures reflective, so they weren't really gaining a ton of heat. But what's really, from a sustainable perspective, what's really cool about it is that by doing this structure, this kind of diagrid exterior shell, we were able to reduce the amount of concrete. So we talked a little bit about concrete earlier, about how, a lot of the embodied carbon sits in the concrete. And there's a lot of things you can do with the mixes and the aggregates within the concrete itself, but that's really regionally specific. It can be challenging if you're in a region where there's not a ton of this research and development going on with kind of new mixes and things. It can be really, we're not going to ship low carbon concrete from New York to Miami.
You've defeated the purpose.
Right, exactly. But one of the ways, and to be fair, we are pushing low carbon mixes in this market, but one of the ways that we can have control over that is just by reducing the amount of concrete.
Sure.
So by having this exterior structure, we're using 30% less concrete than we would have been had it have been a more conventional flat plate column slab structure. So that's a big part of where that started. And then within this building, there's a whole series of climate concepts that we're driving. We looked at all sorts of different strategies, building integrated PV. The client was open to just exploring everything. So we looked at a long feasibility study on geothermal, and which ultimately was not feasible in this environment, but for a number of reasons.
It's great.
Beautiful. I could keep talking about the features of the project.
Let's check out another one here.
So this is the first Santander project here. This is in Chile, in Santiago, and this will be their headquarters there in Santiago. And a really interesting thing, comparing Miami to Santiago's got a much more mild climate. It's warm, but it's dry. You don't have the humidity that you have in Miami. So it makes working outside, think California, it's climate zone 3 equivalent. So you're in a nice, California environment. So you're working outside sounds great. So how can we expand, take the workplace from, just this kind of glass box and expand it into a space where people can work in all sorts of different environments. And so there's this terraces that wrap around this entire structure, and they're covered in outdoor conference spaces, outdoor amphitheaters, more private settings for people to work, and so we're really expanding the floor plate beyond the floor area that we're allowed here by creating all of this outdoor space. What that does is it also sets up these really deep overhangs that prevent a lot of the sunlight from, directly hitting that glass and heating up the interior of the space. So it remains quite cool inside, and that's aided by natural ventilation. It's all naturally ventilated, and it has a radiant slab. So when there does need to be cooling, added to the natural ventilation, it's all happening through a hydronic system in the slab, cools the slab, and then the natural ventilation kind of, carries that air and circulates through the space. So really, really low energy use, and a very kind of holistic approach to cooling. And
I love the fact that you can walk all the way up the building on the outside.
And you can walk all the way up the building on the outside. Cool. Yeah. Experientially, it's also
Netflix has a building like
cool,
that in Los Angeles, which is pretty cool. So it's a great spot.
So this is my baby here. This is Sendero, Sendero Verde. This is a passive house. So the last two were not. This one is just finished. It's the largest certified passive house multifamily development, I believe, in the world.
That's what I have here too. World's largest fully affordable.
Yes, that's what I mean. Fully affordable passive house. Yes, we got to. There's all these kind of language and qualifiers that we have to.
Enormous.
It is. It's a very large project. 709 units across 3 buildings. It was built in 2 phases. It's in East Harlem. Historically disadvantaged community, and the site was a city-owned site, and the city looked at this project and said, okay, we have this opportunity here. This was in 2016. We're going to build an affordable housing development here, but we want to see if passive house is feasible in this at this scale and in an affordable housing context. At the time, we had just finished the house at Cornell Tech, which was at the time the largest and tallest passive house building, which was on Roosevelt Island, part of Cornell Tech's campus. So HPD and the city were interested in seeing, can the benefits that we're seeing there be applied in this affordable housing context. So the effort here was using similar materials to what we would use for our other affordable jobs, masonry veneer, cast place concrete structure, nothing. We're not creating very expensive mega panel walls, sure, or which is what we had to do at Cornell. So here we're using pretty conventional materials and designed it as a passive house. It was really about quality control, about working through. We had the contractor involved very early, so working through the details, making sure they were constructible, that they made sense, that our passive house consultant, Stephen Winter Associates, was reviewing them, doing a bunch of thermal modeling, and making sure that they were performing the way they were expecting. It is all triple glazed. The windows are definitely one of the more expensive parts of it, and it is, a big part of it, kind of going back to that regenerative concept we had earlier, or talked about earlier, is that it was designed envisioned as a community of opportunity by Jonathan Rowe's company, the developer, along with L&M Development and the Acacia Network. But this community of opportunity was really a Jonathan Rowe's idea. And the idea is that, not only do we have housing here, but we're putting a bunch of essential services for the community in the building. And that's all kind of culminates in this public park that ties everything together there in the middle. And it's a private space, but it is operated like a public park. So it's open, same park hours. And
I think what's interesting is you could see definitely that there's much more, the amount of fenestration is much less.
Yeah.
But the windows are, if you look at the buildings around it, right, there's some older buildings around it, and those look like tiny windows in comparison to this. So I think your point earlier of, it may not be a fully glazed building. However, there's plenty of light coming into this building. Yeah. It's definitely, you can see that, it's very clear. I like the one holdout there in the lower corner there. It looks like
there was one parcel holdout on the site. Yeah, actually, there's two of them. The other one is on the other side of the smaller building. It's just an empty lot.
It's always the way. But that's
kinda,
an amazing project.
It gives a little character to the site, having that guy there. So
that's right. No, congratulations. That is
an
extraordinary
thing to work on. And really, the team is such an incredible group of people that we talk about lifelong learning. I mean, I learned so much from them, and we've all kind of we've been working on this together for 7+ years. So it's been a really great experience.
Here's some views of the park itself, some of the interiors as well. It's
great. This is affordable housing is really, at least in New York City, driving passive house. I mean, there are so many since we won this RFP and started this process. There have been so many new passive house buildings that have started and come online at a variety of different scales that are in this affordable, 100% affordable world. And that's really, I think, challenging market rate to step it up.
That's great. Is there a certification to make it officially passive house?
Yeah, so there's two certification bodies. There's the Passive House Institute, which is the international body, and then PHIUS, PHIUS, which is the kind of U.S. body. There was a divorce a long time ago, and I'm not sure all the politics of that, but there's essentially two different certifications.
Okay, got it. And then this one?
This is Harmony Commons, which is now the world's largest certified passive house dormitory.
Dormitory, yep.
This is at the University of Toronto in Scarborough. Okay. So, very different climate zone 6, much colder, very heating dominant climate. And, this is interesting because it's a very dense building. It's dormitory, 740 something beds. So there's a lot of people sleeping in this building, creating heat. So when we're doing the passive house model, or when Stephen Winter's running the passive house model, they have to account for all these bodies and all that kind of internal load that's being built up. And that's, factoring into how we're sizing the systems and how we're thinking about energy performance. So that was an interesting kind of element of this. It is it's a shorter building, or it's not a high rise, it's a 9-story building.
What's the skin on this?
This is it's a metal rain screen.
It is, okay.
So, yeah, aluminum rain screen. Yep, it's kind of a ribbed aluminum panel in a bunch of different colors. Very deep rain screen, 6 inches of insulation on the exterior side, and then more insulation on the between the studs on the interior wall. So we're really, it's really just about the details, getting in and making sure you're validating all the details, both on the thermal performance side and then on the constructability side. Can we actually build this thing by doing this move? Are we making it significantly more expensive? There's subtle things like the windows are, typically you're putting the window right aligned with the backup wall. In a lot of our pass house buildings, the windows actually kind of set into the cavity a little bit, because then it's more in line with the continuous insulation. And when you look at the therm models showing that before, it shows a pretty significant improvement in how much heat is lost through that window frame. But when you think about how many hundreds of linear feet of window,
a lot of
joint you have there.
Yeah.
So it's, there's a lot of those kinds of, little details. And then, so there's the really focused detailing side. And then there's the quality control side on the, inspections, blower door testing, making sure that it's built the way that it was designed. And, to the credit of all the contractors that we've worked with on this project, they've, I can't think of an example of anyone that's really not really jumped into this full tilt. They're excited about, working on these projects, and in a lot of those groups that I was talking about earlier, and New York Passive House, we are now seeing a lot of contractors in those groups. They're interested. Yeah, they're interested in advancing this. They see the benefits of it. They see the way the market's going, and they're a really, really important voice in this conversation, because they, help us make it real.
That's amazing. So, kind of backing up a little bit about you, where did you grow up? Where'd you go to college? How'd you get so smart?
So I grew up in Kentucky. I was born in northern Kentucky, which is kind of in the greater Cincinnati area there. It's suburb of Cincinnati. Great place to grow up. Loved it. I went to University of Kentucky for undergrad, and initially I was thinking I'd be an engineer, but I always loved kind of art and kind of in high school, but I was also kind of technically minded, so I thought, I'll be an engineer. Went and visited some engineering schools. Then I went to University of Kentucky and took the test for architecture on the recommendation of an uncle, and it was way more fun than anything that I had done at any of the engineering schools. I was like, all right, let's give this a try. So it ended up being a great experience. Really, really loved the program there. And I met a teacher, a professor there, who really mentored me and helped kind of guide me towards going to Columbia for grad school, which I ultimately did. Through that period of time, that an undergrad and then grad school, I was, the architecture that I was into was really this kind of I think we were calling it deconstructivist at the time.
I know it well, yeah.
Very, very form-based. These,
That's why I moved to Los Angeles.
Yeah, yes. Well, the kind of sci-arc is kind of the epitome, I think, of that, right? And I there was a lot of excitement in that, a very cool factor of all that, and these really creating these really interesting images and getting into Maya and modeling everything, really, having a good time with that. But I did feel, especially as I was kind of going through grad school, that there was, there was kind of back to that napkin sketch image. Yeah, everything was driven by the image. You scratch the surface, and there wasn't much below there. And it felt like design needed to be a lot more than that to me. And you're starting to see, I was starting to kind of expand, what I was paying attention to, and seeing a lot more kind of, architects that are focused on the human element, how people are experiencing the space, and sustainability being a part of that. And that really drove me to want to, find a path in the profession that had more layers to it, and to the design process.
Sure.
And then, so I graduated, struggled to figure out how to stay in New York for a couple years, worked at a small firm in Harlem, and then eventually got a job there at Handel Architects, and I've been there for the last 13 years, wow. Which has been a great experience. I mean, I've talked a lot about collaboration. I think the collaborative energy of the firm and also just the way they approach projects. I mean, the way Gary and the other partners approach these projects, it's really, the client is really part of the process. It's a client-driven approach. And I think that makes it a really interesting, productive process and really beautiful buildings that people love to live in.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's been inspiring.
How large is the Handel office now?
So we'll fluctuate a bit. So we're probably across all of our offices just under 150.
Okay.
We have most of those folks are in New York, and then we have a satellite office in Boston and in San Francisco and in Hong Kong.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah.
You get to go to some of those?
The Boston, I end up back a bit. In San Francisco, I've been to a few times for things. Haven't made it to Hong Kong yet.
Okay.
Not with Handel.
Well, as we wrap up, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd want to tell the listeners? We covered a lot.
I feel like I talked a lot. Yeah, you get me going. No, I think it's. I think we talked a lot about it. I'd say just. I guess the parting note that I'd say. I was at the AA convention last week, and there was a lot of these discussions about AI and the kind of misinformation and all what we're seeing in the world. These really big trends in the world that are scary and are going to change our industry and have a big impact on us both as people and professionals. But I think there was also a lot of conversations around the opportunity in that and
sure.
the what role can we as architects play in helping to shape that future that's inevitably coming for us. And I think that's an important thing for us to consider because I'm architects can be annoying at times, but I'm also really proud to work in a profession that I think really cares about people. I mean, we kind of judge the quality of our work by the quality of life that comes out of the spaces we create. And sure. I think that's something that we don't see in every profession. And that makes, me proud to be part of it. And also makes me, think that we do need to be active in, shaping what comes, how these big kind of meta trends change society. We need to be part of that.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. I don't see us just sort of pressing a button and it creates real architecture.
Yeah, no way.
I mean, there's certainly going to be parts that get automated, and that's great. And we've already begun, down that road, and we have for many years. So, yeah, I think it's actually going to be an awesome tool that ultimately helps, move our profession forward, which is great. And even the construction side too. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, Louis, thank you so much for being my guest on the Anti-Architect podcast and for educating me in particular and the audience. This was great having you here. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. So to see and read more about Louis and Handel Architects, you can visit handelarchitects.com, and then you can see Louis on LinkedIn as well. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Christian.